Hello, we're here at the Queensland Conservatorium Research Centre. I'm Yoel on behalf of Crny, and I'm sitting with the Con's very own Peter Morris to have a chat about the FilmHarmonic. Now, I have some questions that, will guide things through, but this is more than open to ease into, more of a casual fireside chat.
Fabulous.
Shall we begin?
Let's.
So, if I'm not mistaken, this was the second FilmHarmonic Griffith University has hosted. What was the initial spark of inspiration to put on a FilmHarmonic? In short, why put on a FilmHarmonic?
Good question. So, last year was the first, and it came out of it's sort of a passion project of mine. It always has been. It relates back to my research as an HDR student at UCLA in LA, working with orchestras there and doing visual technology in the concert hall, and I just sort of felt that it was time to sort of give the opportunity to the orchestra to work in that environment, but also just to collaborate, just to reach across the South Bank and do something together with the film school and something interesting and new and different. So that was the genesis of it last year, and it became bigger than Ben-Hur. And then for some reason we did it again. But it's, and now it has its own sort of really fascinating, unique energy as a project.
And how would you say then, how does your FilmHarmonics set itself apart from other Cine concerts?
Well, I think what's interesting is people will see it, and I've had people ask, they see the poster or whatever, and they think, are you just doing, sort of John Williams and major Hollywood films? And actually, that's not the whole idea. There's a little bit of that. A, it's fun for the orchestra to play. B, it mixes it up for the audience. But most of what we are doing is creating new work. So that might be new compositions by our conservatorium composers or faculty, academics. It might be new film or animation projects by GFS that we pair together with a composer and give a world premiere to. It may be taking an existing masterwork of film music and having a Griffith student edit sort of a montage that tells the story with no dialogue. But, so it's not really the images that the music was initially planned for, but in playing the music, telling the story, and that in itself is a new creation. So I like to think that everything we've done on both of our projects has either been new or reimagined, reinvented. Nothing that we've done has just been performed the way it's usually done or that it's been done in the past.
So in that case, you kind of, when you're conducting on stage, you're not trying to recreate the soundtrack as faithfully as possible, but rather trying to, add a fresh spark of life to it then?
Yeah, well, it depends. Last year we did Sorcerer's Apprentice from the Ducat, and that was from Fantasia, and it was based off a specific recording. So in that case, we actually had to, because that was synced with film, we had to recreate the Stokowski recording, which was absolutely terrifying because it was recorded without click track or any of this. It was just recorded as a live orchestra with speeding up, slowing down moments and, all of the things that happen, the little nuances that you don't even notice or plan for. But then to try to recreate that to make it line up with the film was probably the hardest thing I've ever done. So in some cases, it is a new interpretation, but in other cases, it has to be a complete copy in one sense. But then in the other sense, what we bring to it live or what we bring to it with the film might be new. So each and every project, in this one there were 12, each and every piece or project is its own little research project, basically with its own composer, film either maker, animator, editor, what have you, all of the people behind the scenes with the click track, and that's each one was its own little, and they're all unique.
And so when you're actually putting together and planning a FilmHarmonic, Who selects what's chosen, or really, what's the criteria for what you perform on the FilmHarmonic, both in film and, score-wise?
Well, one of the best things about being a conductor is you get to pick music that you want to do. It's not always the case. So in the big bad world, when things are driven purely by you need to fill bums on seats and sell tickets, a lot of times you don't necessarily get to pick whatever you want to do. You have to do what sells tickets and that sort of thing. But in this context, is what I love about working in sort of this level of academia, because the performers are basically professional. The film students I'm working with are basically professional, yet we're able to play in a space that we can do things that don't have the same sort of requirements that the professional space does. They got to pay the bills. Well, of course we've got to pay the bills, and we sold out, and that's fantastic. We sold every ticket, but it's not that sort of situation where the artistic freedom is sacrificed. So I get to choose it, but what I do is I approached Herman at the film school and Peter Moyes, and have said, right, what projects do you have that might lend themselves to this? Now, last year it was more difficult because nobody had the concept yet. I had to try to convince everybody of the concept. This year, having been through it once, they went, right, this would be perfect, or that sort of thing. So it's a combination of what films already exist that we can put music to, what things are currently being researched that could be delivered in a way that we can put it in front of live, audience. I mean, much of what we presented last week was not originally intended for live audience, or if it was not live performance. It was to for an audience to watch a film, sort of thing. So, and then usually what I do is I get more ideas than we can handle, and then sort of have to look at what will make a nice balanced program and what will be achievable. And in both circumstances, I've gone just a little bit over that, so it's frantic. I'm kicking myself. I should have just made it a little bit smaller. But you get these great projects, and it's really hard to turn them down, because they're so exciting.
Yeah, definitely. So on that note of still, choosing the lineup, I wanted to ask you a bit more about the QCGU Score It competition. I was wondering how involved you are with that. Do you have a hand of what films are chosen for the high schoolers? And if so, what criteria are for those films?
Well, yeah, thanks. The Score It project is great. It's amazing, and just for those who don't know about it, it has been in existence for many years. We've worked together with the Queens and Music Festival, where we've had an animation supplied by the film school, by a student animator, that we've had all of the sound and any existing music stripped out of. We send it around to schools, and classroom music teachers use it as a way to teach a film scoring part of their curriculum. And then for those students that want to, they then submit their scores. Others just do it, and it happens within their school, and we don't even know about it. We just provide them that opportunity. But those who want to submit the score for the competition, we then we have a cutoff date and all that sort of thing. They have to send in a score in a MIDI rendering so we can hear sort of a version of it, and then we choose. We get a panel of folks. So this myself, I'm very involved, and but for the last couple of years, Peter Moyes, for example, has just shared with me the animations, a large number of animations, student animations that we could choose from, and I've tried to pick things that I think would be suitable for the audience, would be a good challenge for the students, for the young pre-tertiary students, secondary students. And that would fit into a program neatly. We then send those out. But the other great thing is that when the scores come in, I have a look at them, selfishly. But we also have Gerardo Dirier, who's our head of composition, and some of his students. And we've actually had some of his alumni, recent alumni, who came up through Score It and through the con, look at it. So it's this whole ecosystem. And we come to a consensus on who the winner is, and then that winner gets to have their piece played by a 70-piece orchestra with 600 people in the audience, which is massive for a high school student to have that opportunity. So that's sort of what the process is. The Pete Moyes and the animation folks give me some to work with. I select a couple. We send it out to schools, and I actually have no idea whether 50 or 5,000 students are actually using this material, because they might not submit. They might just use it for their assessment at school. So, and that's something that we just provide. So.
So when Peter or Herman sends you a film to submit to those students, what makes you choose a particular film? Would this be an instance of the visuals kind of guiding the composing?
Yeah, look, I think some of, being student films, there's a whole variety of, content. Some of it might not be appropriate for young students, some for schools. So one of the guiding factors is, what can I, in good faith, send out to schools and not get complaints about that this is not appropriate, because some of them will have students as young as year 8 or 9 involved with this. The other thing is I try to imagine something that isn't too complex or too changing, that would almost require multiple different types of music to be composed. So if the storyline goes from one scene to another scene to another scene, and you'd think, oh, we need different music for that, different music for that, different music for that, it might be a bit too much of a challenge. So trying to find something that has a bit of a through line, something that I can imagine students, but you never imagine. The runner-up, for example, this year was a completely different style, sound, orchestration, everything than the student who was selected. I would have loved to have played both of them, and I'm thinking about next year potentially doing that, to show the audience and the other composers and filmmakers how powerful the film music is to the story. Because I think the audience watching the runner-up would have had a very different experience of the film. So that's something that in finding this, in reviewing these, it's a shame to not put them all through.
So you can kind of really see how. Would you then say that sometimes a different score can impact the narrative of the film?
Absolutely. Well, so we had Tim Davies here. You were there.
Yeah.
And one of the things that he mentioned is when filmmakers, so that they put in a temp track when they're making the film before they get the composer on board, and that temp track might be existing film music, or it might be classical music, or it might be a rock tune or whatever, that is just a placeholder while they're putting the film together, and then they can fall in love with that temp track. It's temp love, he was calling it. And then you can have a composer come in and write an entire score to a film, and they go, no, we hate it. Because it doesn't align with the way that they're seeing it. But then in the same case, you'll play something, and it'll completely, and I think some things like the music can certainly heighten, as the obvious things are the psycho strings music and so it can certainly heighten the moments. And there are times, I think, where the composer might see something and really bring it out that the filmmaker sort of might have either overlooked or not seen as major, and then the music sort of amplifies it. So,
because it's kind of in the matter of the fact that the filmmaker might just be looking at it from more of a visual standpoint and really trying to have their eyes on so many different things, but then the composer is able to come from a different angle and really focus more on that aural aspect.
Yeah. So it's really interesting. And the thing is the amount of music that's written that doesn't get used because it doesn't meet with the idea of the director and that sort of thing. So it is one of those. But as Tim said, earlier in his career and before he's as well known, more of it ended up on the floor. But as the more that he's well known and sought after, the more faith there is in. No, I know you know what you're doing. We're gonna run with your score, even if I don't like one bit at the beginning. I've got the faith that it'll be good. So I think that's why when you get your Spielbergs and your John Williamses, and when you get these creative teams together that can trust each other, that's when you get magic.
Yeah, because I'd say that's oftentimes, like in film, that's what a good director is. A good director is someone who knows the strengths of their team and lets them do their job and kind of conducts it, if you will.
Hey, very good.
Yeah. So really when you're getting started for the film harmonic, so how does the rehearsal preparation differ for the film harmonic from, conducting for a regular orchestra?
Well, the main difference is for this, we're basically on click track for most everything. I think in this show, the only two pieces that we weren't on click track were the very beginning 20th Century Fox, because it's 30 seconds long and you can't stray too far in 30 seconds, and the Star Wars at the end, because it was for the scroll credits, which were fabulous, by the way.
Thank you.
But because they didn't have to necessarily align with anything, it allowed us to just play the 5.5-minute piece the way we wanted to, and actually that was very freeing after doing an hour and a half of music all on click. But to answer your question, because we're all on click track, I'm on click track as the conductor, and this is in the cheap academic version of this. In the studios, everyone is on headphones and everyone can hear the click track. So really, the job of the conductor becomes far less time management and more traffic cop. Whereas in the context of this, because I'm the only one that can hear the click track, they have to watch so much more, and in a normal orchestral situation, there's a lot of delegation. I might set the general pulse or that sort of thing, and the orchestra lives and breathes and wants to speed up during this bit, and you let them, because the whole idea is it's not, it's the conductor's job, I believe, is to take everyone's collective sort of interpretations into one. Not to say, this is my interpretation, this is what it will be. So if the orchestra wants to move and flow, I'll move and flow with them, but making sure that they stay together. In a click track environment, you can't do that. So it's really awkward and this is why it's so good for our student orchestral players that haven't done this before, that you don't have the freedom to flow, and that I don't think they realize how much there is of that in a normal circumstance. So I have to start with a click from the very beginning, because otherwise they get used to a tempo that might not be the right one, and that's really hard to undo.
And now, for those of the people watching, could you elaborate a bit more what exactly a click track is?
Oh, absolutely. So it's basically a metronome, but what it is it's sort of specifically timed to that piece of music. So that let's say a 7-minute piece of music might have 10 different sections. One of them is at 60 beats per minute, and so in my ear I'm hearing tick, 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 tick. I'm hearing 60 beats per minute. But then it goes to a faster bit that's 120 beats per minute. So then I'll hear tick, 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 and I've got to keep that together. And if we're off by even a beat, when the big moment happens, or the big explosion, or the big kiss, or the big whatever, everything is timed so that works perfectly. And if we're off by a little bit, then you don't get that. You actually notice the orchestra, which you shouldn't. The idea is it should just feel like when you're watching the film. Now this is a bit different when you've got a live orchestra, but the whole idea is when you're watching the film is the music just helps tell the story, but it isn't as noticed, sort of thing. So yeah, so with the click track, I've got that. So all the starts and the stops and everything, it's in my ear, and that's sort of what it's the leash that keeps us in time. It's very difficult to do. Have a full orchestra with only the conductor on click, but it's very expensive to do a full orchestra with everyone on click. But when I do things for Queensland Symphony Orchestra, for example, or touring shows that, films over at the convention center where the orchestra plays along with a film, oftentimes it'll be myself on click and maybe someone in percussion or in the rhythm section, but then the rest of the orchestra just has to watch. So I hope that explains.
No, that does explain. So is that the only method of staying in sync with the film, or do the visuals play a role in staying in sync?
Well, I also have a monitor. I have a sort of video monitor in front of me that is showing the film, but overlaid, and it depends on which one it is, but there's the options of, there's the bar numbers, there's the beats, so sometimes it might be bar 126, beat 1, 2, 3, 4, 127, 1, 2, 3, 4, and you can actually watch that, and that can almost be like a click, because it's changing as a visual click. The other thing is I have streamers, which is actually the old school. They're still used now, but if you're on click, it's more of a reminder. But it comes across the screen gradually, and that's just, if there's a major moment or a big rehearsal letter, or like I said, an explosion or a kiss or a significant moment where things line up, I'll get a red line or a green line or whatever that comes across the screen, and right when it hits the right of the screen is when that happens. So it can be a bit of overkill when you've got bar numbers, beat numbers, click. But for example, when we were rehearsing in the dress rehearsal of Maya and the Three, which I think we'll talk about later, as you get technical difficulties, my screen went blank. So a lot of the information that I was expecting wasn't there, and I only had the click, and it was fine. It just takes a lot more focus and concentration. And likewise, last year for FilmHarmonic, a number of the pieces that were slow and gorgeous and didn't need to lock in quite as well, except for at major moments, I had no click, and I would just get through a section, and then as it slowed down, I'd see the streamer come across, and I'd know to start the next bit. And that's the way in the old films where the recordings were done live without click, is the streamers.
So in theory, it is possible to conduct, to a film purely based on the visuals then.
Yep. Yeah. I mean, I did a when I was doing my doctorate at UCLA, I had the great opportunity to work with a couple of people. Jerry Goldsmith was one, the late great Jerry Goldsmith, and John Williams was another. And Jerry was doing one thing we were doing Star Trek, Next Generation, the movie, in the studio, and he had click, and all the computerized help that he could get, and it was a variable click, which meant instead of going tick, 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 tick there, it actually went from 126.3 beats per minute to 126.58 beats per minute to 126, it changed to really make the moment, and there was a kiss. And he kept doing it with the click, and he just kept feeling like, the magic's not happening. Took off his headphones, in a rage, and just did it once, just following. And then he held the orchestra, and then right at the kiss, he did it, and then it flowed, and it was gorgeous, and it was actually really special to be there and see that, because it allowed, the human element was actually more powerful than all of the tech, in that case.
So on that note, then that would actually be a question, because that sounds like it's a good example of an answer to this next question, but how would you reconcile the pre-recorded nature of cinema versus the live performative nature of an orchestra?
Yeah, well, it's really, really tricky. And, in the program, one of the, I thought I wrote it really well, so I'm going to go find it. I just said, our featured composers and filmmakers have demonstrated great courage, generosity, and trust in placing their artistic creations into the hands of our musicians, adding the excitement and vulnerability of live orchestral performance. In films, you can do it and redo it and stay up all night and get it edit and cut and get it right there and bring this down. Live performance is live performance, and it is what it is, and it exists once. And that's it. And it is very vulnerable and that sort of thing. I think it goes also back to that idea of feeling shackled by the click track. When the orchestra just naturally wants to move and breathe, and they feel, artistically, you feel like you could be, it's not as good because there's too many boxes and boundaries. So then the art, it's a different kind of art. The art in that space is being able to be flexible in and around the structures, knowing where the important parts are that you must align, and then the points where the orchestra I'll let them get a little bit ahead. Okay, I'll pull them back because we've got a bit that has to line up. So it's different than just your own interpretive free creation, because you've got other elements, and so that's part of it. But I think that it's never just reproducing and cranking it out. There's always an artistic, might be a different way to approach it, given the nature of having to align with film, but there's always, it's just a different way of having to channel the artistry.
Yeah, then how would you say then the films change each performance despite their pre-recorded nature? Like, how so? Like, what would be an example of a way you'd feel that the film kind of changes as a result of this, element of the live music of maybe going off the click track?
Well, it's really tricky. I think the energy that live performance brings, and also that a live audience brings, is clearly different than watching something at home on Netflix, for example. And I would say the same as I would think that any film directors would say the same, of that feeling of being in the room and as a community, as a group, reacting to film. So you appreciate it in a different way in the live environment, even without an orchestra. You appreciate it differently in that environment than you do at home in your jammies on the couch. So to add the orchestra to that, you appreciate it in a different sort of way. And certainly with the orchestra there, the music becomes much more prominent, and then because of that, that vulnerability, and every performance is slightly different, whether the crescendo builds to a level 80 or it builds to a level 92 because everyone's really riding the wave, it's going to be different each time. I'll protect their anonymity, but one of the techs, one of the rough and ready technical folk backstage at FilmHarmonic this year was there for the rehearsals, the dress rehearsal, and that sort of thing. And then on the Friday night performance, well, they came up to me afterwards and said, right at this moment in the Maya piece, tears just started coming out of their eyes. Now, they'd seen it in rehearsal. There's no spoiler. Like, they knew what was going to happen. Yeah. But the energy of the moment, the audience, the everything happening, that collective thing, it got them. And I went, yes.
Yeah, I'm not going to lie. I also had that reaction seeing that as well.
And so the thing is I'm not saying that can't happen in an orchestral concert. And I'm not saying that can't happen, because clearly it happens in films. People are eating their popcorn and dabbing their eyes, But to me, it goes back to your question about why do this. There's something about the collaborative arts that if we can find that sweet spot, whether it be sadness or the thrill, excitement, or fear or anger or whatever, that plays not only orally but visually, but it's just it's more toys to play with. Do you know what I mean?
So then would you say perhaps like one of the elements that live orchestra adds is it really does up the emotional intensity of the narrative? It kind of like accentuates that.
I think so, because as Tim Davies said in his Q&A that we had for the students, there are a lot of times where you're building something up, and then because they want to hear the dialogue in the mix, they go, boom, bring the orchestra out. And as the composer, you go, no, that's right. The moment where the chord progression just lends itself to this, and then in the studio they just go, or in the edit, and they bring it down. I think that being able to play the music in a way that the composer intended, without it being chopped and cut and pieced together, probably allows for more of that emotional to come through. Now, the flip side of it is you could argue that by doing that, maybe some of the dialogue then gets overwhelmed by the orchestral sound, and so maybe from the filmmaker's perspective, it might that moment was ruined because we couldn't hear the dialogue. So there's always going to be that interplay of which is better, and that's subjective. Everyone's going to have a different opinion about that. So it's a tricky one, but I do think emotionally, there's probably there's that capacity to go on a bit further of a journey.
Yeah. So on that note of kind of talking about, overwhelming the dialogue, what challenges do a more dialogue and narrative-driven piece like, An Ostrich Told Me the World is Fake and I Think I Believe It present compared to a more musically driven short like that Fantasia one? Because that film is phenomenal and so is all Mr. Snap, but both of them in themselves aren't that dependent on music. They're more dependent on the visuals and the narrative. So I'm just kind of wondering why choose that sort of piece, which is less about music in the get-go and the challenges.
Well, okay, so let's take the Ostrich one, for example. So Ostrich Told Me the World is Fake and I Think I Believe It. Lachlan Pendragon's creation, which is amazing, absolutely amazing, and of course kicking goals and winning awards all around the world without our score. So he had his own score to that, which was quite minimal. There wasn't a lot of music in that. When I saw it for the first time, we were actually out in Longreach, and it was played on the side of 747 at the Qantas Founders Museum as part of our show out there, regional engagement show. And that's the first time I saw it, and I went, "This is amazing! This is so great!" And I thought, there's very little music, and the music that was there was very specific to certain moments of action or non-action in the 13-minute piece, or 11, I forget. but the thing is a lot of it was without score. So I saw that as an opportunity. You say, why that piece? Because so much of it is dialogue. I saw it as an opportunity for one of our students to play in that space. And if we go back and look at Andrew Udall, who wrote the new score to that, he actually kept in most of what was originally there, which is Bizet's Habanera from Carmen. He kept that in, and then when it fades out, there would sometimes be 2 or 3 minutes of no music. He would add in music, but not as a big block. There were lots of times where we played for 30 seconds, and then we sat for 30 seconds. So it wasn't through composed sort of thing. And if you look at, I used to do this thing for my students to say, go look at a Simpsons episode or something. And first, guess how many music cues are in that episode? Okay, I'll ask you. How many music cues are in a Simpsons episode? No, they're all going to be different. They're going to be an episode where they do the musical.
Yeah.
And, that sort of thing. But just a normal,
so everyday, a dialogue one.
Yeah, normal.
I want to say, 30, because I speaking as an animator, I do know sometimes that having those little musical cues can really up comedy and that sort of thing.
Yeah, so we I had some students look into that and do a bit of a project. And, it was sometimes 70 and sometimes 12. But usually much more than any of them thought that it was. Because there might just be two notes on a tremolo string that you don't even notice, but they're there. And I've had them actually bring me an episode back and say, there are 23. And I've already looked at it, and I know that there's 40. I said, really? Yep. So okay, let's look at it together. And there's a bit of a moment where just this tremolo comes up and goes down, and that's it. I go, well, you didn't count that one. I didn't hear it. And that's the thing, is some of them, they're not obvious. They're just, that. So in Ostrich, what was great is Andrew, first-year composer here, did an amazing job of doing some of that just background sound stuff without having to develop a full theme, just to carry the energy forward. And he had said that Lachlan was very, very happy with what he did. So what's interesting is this film's going all around the world and winning these awards, yet there's another version of it with this new score that brings us something different.
Oh, fantastic. So I want to bring it back to something you were saying about the audience earlier, because earlier you were talking about, you were mentioning, in a film, the audience just will enjoy the film. So within the FilmHarmonic, where exactly do you want the audience to look? Do you want them to enjoy the film, or do you want them to really appreciate the orchestra? Where do you want them to look?
That's probably the biggest question. And there's something else about that. The interesting thing when we sort of, the nexus of these different art forms that have different audience reactions. I mean, another question is when should they clap? Presuming they want to clap. When should they clap? There were certain times where the music finished and the audience just went immediately into applause. There are other times where the music finished, the credits started, and some more credit music happened, and they sort of went, oh, or you heard it. And people didn't know, because it's two different art forms, and usually in movies, in films, there's not applause right before the credits, and then maybe at a film festival there will be, but it might be after all the credits are done to recognize everyone, whereas the concert-going public is used to applauding after the orchestra finishes their final note. So that doesn't answer your question, but it's another sort of nuance about combining art forms is there's all of a sudden there's no expected way of so to answer your question, I don't know where to look. I mean, we did the flying carpet piece where we had Persian instruments, we had the orchestra, we had Leila Anari's amazing animation, and then we had the Sufi dancer with projection on her dress.
Yeah.
Where do you not look? So, and I think part of it, I guess, is the spectacle. I mean, I think in that instance, there's so much to see and so much to appreciate. And I don't want to do a disjustice to the animation, but it's not the sort of thing where there's a storyline that if you look away, you'll miss. You might miss if you all of a sudden you're fixated here, or you're watching the oud player, and go, oh, I need to look back up here again. All of a sudden, the work doesn't mean nothing to you. It's all part of the experience. So I think part of it is making sure that you don't distract from what's important. There are certain times where the most important thing is on the screen, I think, and there are certain times where the most important thing is in the orchestra, or that sort of thing. So, for example, in the ostrich piece, there's the bit where it goes to the commercial. No spoilers. It goes to the commercial, and it's big up tempo sort of honky tonk piano, that sort of thing. The orchestra's clapping and that sort of thing. And I had the brass stand up and do fanfares, this with their horns, as you would see sort of in a sort of like an old R&B band sort of thing. I had to stop and think, am I visually drawing away from that added element would add to the energy in the room and the comedy and that sort of thing, but I wanted to make sure that I wasn't drawing too much away from what's happening on screen, because that's an important part of the film. If you're looking at the orchestra and you miss that entirely, then you miss the plot. Yeah. So, but I think people got the energy of that. The orchestra's clapping, and the brass are playing like this, and they sort of get that, and then look back at the film, and they can still see that activity's happening. Yeah. And I think that brought a new energy and a lift to the piece, without, hopefully, you can ask Lachlan, without distracting too much.
Most definitely, because I'd say, speaking as someone who was watching it, I really enjoyed that portion. What I thought was really good is when they got up and had their trumpets pointing up, I felt almost as if they kind of were, because they were pointing up, they were still guiding our eyes towards the screen. Right. So I thought it did work really well with some high energy and guided the screen, but just thought...
And just a little bit, it wasn't too much of the orchestra saying, look at me, look at me, look at me.
Yeah.
So, but it is a tricky one, because it's a new... Not new, but it's because it's an untested sort of live performance space. There aren't really rules yet about what's distracting, what's appropriate, where do you want the audience to look, when do you want them to clap. That's what I love about it. It's new, it's not obvious.
Well, that's fantastic. So, going in a more general direction, so what film was the most challenging to conduct to and prepare for, and why?
The most challenging in this year, last year, by far, over the 2 years, the Sorcerer's Apprentice one was the hardest. Because, as I mentioned, it was an original recording done not to click track. So Stokowski and the orchestra had could do whatever they wanted to with it. They could speed up, slow down, and we actually had to create the click track for that. We actually had to go in and notate this bar, it's up 4 beats per minute. This bar, and there's 700 something bars. This 4 bars later, it's down 8 beats per minute, because it was just so hard to stay with. So that was the hardest, recreating something that had the freedom to be live. This year, probably the trickiest one was Hudson Beck's amazing piece, Moon Voyage. And I didn't pick it at first. I didn't pick that it would be as tricky as it was. When I was studying the score and looking at the click guide, I thought, yep, this is all very straightforward. The trickiness came in the tempo changes. So in my ear, I'm getting tick, 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 then tick, 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 tick. And the margin, the opportunity for error at that speed is quite possible, right? It's a very easy to be off slightly. And then once you're off slightly, it's very hard to get back on. And then some of the things that come out of that go into compound meter and are really, they're not tricky to play, but when you're trying to chase your tail and get back in time with the thing, then all of a sudden, instead of being in 4/4, it's in 7/8, and that sort of thing. It adds complexity. So that was the one that was the one in the dress rehearsal we stopped. And that was that. I took the moment. I said to the audience, I said, "It's a rehearsal." So if we didn't stop, it wouldn't feel like a rehearsal. But it was literally because the tempo changes, and that's nothing against Hudson. The piece is great. It was literally with the very, very short amount of rehearsal time we had, and the short amount of time we had to live with the piece, getting the whole orchestra ready to turn on a dime. Now, if I was conducting that piece without click, we did it once without the click. No problem. Absolutely no problem.
Because I would have thought that a bit more, because the film was more of, it was more of like a collage of scenes. So of course there were moments that would have a bit more emotional impact, but I've thought there would have been a lot more flexibility in that sense.
I almost wished that I was doing the old school streamers on that one. Because at the major moments, I could see them coming. I could slow down or speed up to make sure that moment happened. But the little intricate tempo shifts that, you're right, didn't really matter in terms of exactly when things lined up. Sometimes they did. But once you're off, it's then really hard to get back on with this thing in your ear going ding, 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 ding. That's what's really tricky. So that's what, like I said, we played it once without the click track, and it was just set so beautifully, and it was lovely, and that's an orchestra will do that. They'll all adjust. The sensors go up, and they all focus in and adjust on something. When it's in my ear and they don't get to do that the way that they're normally trained to do, even without thinking, they adjust and they align. They have to adjust to whatever they're seeing, and it might feel a bit odd because it's rushed, because this, So that was the trickiest one.
Okay, so really it was that oral element of really making sure the tempo and stuff, that's really what drove that piece.
Yeah. And it wouldn't have been if they all would have had click track in their ears. Or if we did it without click. But because of the click, same with the Sorcerer's Apprentice in the previous year. The trickiest thing was being able to do it and stay with the click when the orchestra feels like doing something else.
And I'm guessing then Sorcerer's Apprentice, then that would have had the extra challenge because, like I said, the Moon Voyage, it was more of a video collage, so there's a bit of flexibility. But with Sorcerer's Apprentice, because it was more of a narrative.
Every single time Mickey takes a step, or the broom sweeps, or the whatever, the wave crashes every single thing. But see, that's the thing. That's when you've got the record. See, we're sort of reversing the system on that one. They recorded this piece of music that was an orchestral masterwork. Then Disney went in and animated it. And like I said, they could take weeks, months, years to do every single thing perfect, and they play it back and it's always going to be perfect. We then went backwards in time and tried to then add a live element to something that was already existing, and that's why it's so tricky with that one. But yeah.
Then conversely, which film was the easiest to conduct to this year, and why?
Possibly The Godfather, because it is just such gorgeous writing. It's beautiful score, and the moments in it where they line up are a little bit. I could be far more flexible with the click track in my ear because I didn't want it to be perfectly in time, and at the tempos that it was at, it was. I could have that license to know that I'm a little bit behind, and I'm going to catch up. And in classical music, that's called rubato, where it's robbed time, where you pull back a little bit, and then you flow. And from this point to this point, you're still at the same point. You're still, right on. But instead of staying perfectly in time, you've done a couple of, ebb and flows along the way. So I knew I could do that and get away with it in The Godfather. And I think also with the choir, just adding that gorgeous sound to it and everything like that. So it really came together quite easily.
Does it also, with the visual element of it, is it also a bit easier because while The Godfather, the film in of itself has a big narrative, this sort of, tribute or collage, it's less of a narrative but more of the essence of a narrative.
Yeah.
So does that also add to a bit more flexibility
Absolutely.
to it?
Yeah. And it was the same last year when we did Cinema Paradiso and we did The Mission, Gabriel's oboe from The Mission, and those sorts of things, where the student editors making the montage to tell the story, but it wasn't that sort of every single beat or bar has to hit with something like that. You have that flexibility, that freedom. Yeah.
And how did the preparations for the Godfather Suite, where it was a bit more of a montage, differ from the preparations for the Maya Suite? Because it was kind of a similar thing in the sense that it was kind of a montage of like the key moments and essence of it. But could you tell us a bit more about the Maya Suite?
So the Maya, for those who don't know yet, this is really exciting. It was sort of one of our centerpieces for this concert. Was Tim Davies, Conservatorium alumnus, composer, Hollywood composer, orchestrator, arranger, musician, and it was so great having him here. He got so excited by this project that he flew out from LA on his way to London. So it was so great to have him. And the interesting thing with that was, when I first spoke with him, we were just going to do the final sort of 6-minute. It's called The Sun and Moon, of the final chapter or episode, where they're all celebrating post this big sort of battle, conflict. And it's beautiful music. It's really gorgeous, and it brings in various different sort of South American, Mesoamerican sounds and instruments and all that sort of thing. But I came back to him and I said, look, for anyone who hasn't seen, all of the chapters ahead, or knows the backstory, it's going to feel, and one of the most important things to me is telling a story in this. So even though it would have synced up because it was the music that was originally written for those 7 minutes of film, if people don't know the story, then it's a little bit less meaningful. So I said, can we just add in the first 30 seconds from episode 1, which tells of the legend that builds up to this big battle. And then, obviously, there's a battle, and then after the battle, this is the celebration. So he then said, okay, we could do that. And then next thing I heard, I just got regular updates saying, yeah, it's happening, don't worry, it's happening. And I knew that it was. I knew I could trust him because they turn around. In Hollywood, they turn stuff around in the space of a day or two. So and we had months. Then I finally get this draft from his assistant, and it's 13 minutes. And I was expecting 7 plus the extra 30 seconds just to make it work. And he goes, yeah, we got to thinking about you're wanting to tell a story, and we thought, there's that bit from chapter 4, there's that bit from here. So they actually stitched together this suite, and Netflix gave permission, which is amazing. This suite that incorporates the very beginning and the very ending, but with some bits in between to provide context and to tell the story in a way that's different than just the montage. Yeah. Because each of those bits of story actually had the music that was originally written for them. So it wasn't just we're playing the Godfather Suite and here's some... Yeah. We're actually playing... During this 30 seconds of video, we were playing the 30 seconds of scoring that was originally intended for it. So it was this really weird quilt of bits and pieces put together. I thought it was magic. I thought it was really good. But so in preparation for that, I mean, he then delivered what they have on the Hollywood scoring stage. So I had the clicks, I had the streamers, I had the, everything, that he would have had when he was conducting it for Netflix, the recording. So that was really great.
So it's almost as if you kind of went through the essence of the score of the entire series in 13 minutes.
Yeah, pretty much. It was, condensed version. Yeah.
Oh, fantastic.
But what was really
check on our time.
What was really interesting about that one was that when we started rehearsing it, I was having the click in my ear and that sort of thing. But because there's so much dialogue and sound effects, all the battle scenes with the everyone's weapons clanking and all that sort of stuff, that had to be played over as well. And so the first time we got in the theater and ran it, and the orchestra was because they'd only been doing the music so far. So it was really interesting adding that element for the performers. And there's one special comment. There's one bit where the troops are marching and they're going, oh, ah, oh, ah, oh, ah, or whatever. And we're playing dum, 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 and it's out of time. So the people, the dialogue track is totally out of time with the music, and the orchestra's wanting to go with them because naturally they hear we'll lock in with that. That's what musicians do. And I had to be no, and that was late in the game because so when we first started rehearsing it was just the music. So then they hear these sound effects and they want to sort of they hear something consistent. They want to go to it. So, anyway, it's great learning all around.
So in that sense, you had to kind of fight with the video a little bit in that sense.
Yeah, thanks, Tim.
So really before we get more into your research, one last question to wrap up this portion. What would you say is the relationship between the aural and the visual in a cine concert?
Well, I would hope it's symbiotic. I would hope that everything combines to heighten the senses and not distract, like we were talking about. I don't think one is more important than the other. I mean, one of the, I hearken back to the people I learned from, and I had great opportunity to learn from. One of my favorite quotes that John Williams said was, "If you hear the orchestra," I think I said before, "then I failed." So now that's in a normal film situation, not a cine concert. Yeah. But he's talking about, the epic music to Star Wars or E.T. or Jurassic Park. And he said, if you are watching that moment and you are actually thinking, oh, the trumpets sound amazing, or you're thinking, whatever, that is epic string writing or whatever, he says, I've failed. So his actual brief is to heighten the music. The film composer's brief is to help tell the story and not get in the way. So then, I then take this to a live concert situation where obviously you're going to notice the orchestra, and then you go, are we going against John Williams' wishes? And all of these composers who have said that their main purpose is to that, and I think no, because we're trying to do something different. There are people who love film music, who love listening to film music without the picture, and it was always intended to be done with the picture. Yeah. But there are people that's taken on a life of its own. So you can just do film music concerts, which is great. Yeah. But then putting it back together, and maybe with a little bit of a different pecking order, is what I think audiences are really engaged by at the moment. So, but more so, I mean, that more so is the way to treat it. So, for example, Herman van Eyken's works, the tango music that we did with Lira Tango, I thought it was, in a way, it was so great to have an accordion and a flamenco guitarist and a violinist right there. These instruments that play the music, that make it soulful, that make it really feel and taste like the tango dance. That in a way that brings and just what Herman's done here then is knowing that there's going to be those live musicians, and then having the dancers up on screen. Hopefully that's a more realistic outcome than if he just played the film and had that recording being played through the speakers. So the hope there then is that that film was done specifically for live performance. Well, The Godfather wasn't, it was, and Maya wasn't, but in Herman's work, he directed that film knowing that there would be live performers there. So I think that there's a really interesting. It's not just recreating; it's creating.
So really, in addition to conducting, you're also a researcher. So could you tell us a bit more about your research and really how this all ties into the FilmHarmonic?
Well, look, like I said, my research when I was doing my doctorate was visual technology in the concert hall. Now that was in the late 90s, and none of that technology is the same anymore. So, but it wasn't really nuts and bolts. It was about the idea of combining the art forms. The idea, and there was a lot being done with the LA Phil at the time, and a lot of Japanese animators in creating new works purely for that sort of synesthetic idea, the multiple senses. And so I've always been fascinated by it. And for many, many years here at the Con, elements of my concerts have included, collaborating with whomever, just to add something new. Like we did a piece with the Wind Orchestra a couple of years ago that was a symphony for the ocean, had 3 different movements, and I had music technology students put an entire layer of soundscaping over the existing music. And I wrote to the composer in America and said, "This is something I'd love to do. Would you endorse this? I don't want to just butcher your music." And she was very happy with that. And then we added a visual. We added lots of visuals of ocean, and there was a commentary on the health of our oceans and that sort of thing. So then I think there's an opportunity then for this research. I'm not saying it's saving the world. What I'm saying is it gives us the opportunity to use music to tap into ideas that could then have further exploration, or to help bring awareness to something that perhaps before that concert, perhaps before that rehearsal even, people hadn't thought about it in the same way. So, but for me, the research is about for FilmHarmonic, is literally about putting creatives together to make things happen in ways that I think there's a demand for, that the audiences are curious about, that students are loving to play, filmmakers are loving having their works done live, and it's new learning. And who knows? Maybe we develop a culture of what is expected and what can be expected by going to a film concert that's not just regurgitating film scores, but that is, intentionally putting forward pieces of art that have been created for live performance. So that's the research. That's it. And like I said, this one had 12 projects, and not a single one of them was just performed the way it would be done anywhere else in the world. Each one had some new element, whether it be brand new composition or something that was revised or something that was reimagined. So to me, that's the research element of what we do, and then it's sharing that locally around the world. Herman has already been discussing, and I've been discussing with folks in Singapore, in the UK, in Europe, about taking this idea and collaborating together. Maybe doing a concert in Bologna, for example, where we take some of our students and our filmmakers, and we do that. We put together with some filmmakers over there and an orchestra there, and do a real collaborative thing with the idea of having increased impact. Like the impact thing, for example, the Line Rider one, the Doodle Chaos animation one for the Grieg Mountain King. When I reached out to Mark Robbins, the animator, and said, hey, I know you've had 20 million views of this or whatever, and he's done the Beethoven's Fifth and all these other ones. I said, we would love to do this live. I know it sounds crazy, but we'd love to do this live. It's sort of like the Sorcerer's Apprentice thing. Taking a piece of music, he's now animated it, and now I'm wanting to reverse that and do it live. And he was so excited. And he said, you make sure you video it. As soon as you filmed it, send it to me. I'll share it with my millions of followers. He wanted bragging rights. So I think it's important that we did go and get permission, licensing, and we were very, like Netflix gave it to us for free because Tim is an alumnus. He composed the music and he worked for Netflix. That doesn't exist anywhere in the world, and we've gotten this brand new suite with all the video rights, licensing rights, and everything. Disney, for free, has allowed us to use the Fantasia material. Line Rider and Doodle Chaos, it was a very basic licensing fee, but they could have charged us through the nose, but they didn't. So I think the other side of it is because we're not professional in terms of we're just trying to make money off of this, but this is exploration and research, and it's billed that way. I've found people are happy to come on board and say, yeah, we'll support this. As opposed to saying, yeah, you can do it as long as you pay us this hefty fee. And, Netflix and Disney could certainly command a hefty fee. But the cool thing is that there are people in those places, in all places. Yeah. And it's in the relationships with the people that they go, I see what you're doing, and I'll support it. You know what I mean? So.
No, but that's fantastic and really generous of Netflix and Disney and the Line Rider to all come together and help out this project. So just one final question before we wrap things up. What sets FilmHarmonic apart from other cinema concerts?
Well, I think the fact that it is not just recreating existing film scores with a live orchestra. And when I say just, I'm not saying that that's bad. Because I do that, It's one of the things that I do outside of the university. But I think what sets it apart is people don't know what to expect. And even though they might look at the program ahead of time and know that we're going to do Godfather or know that we're going to do, in Maya or any given piece or Libertango, they don't necessarily know that there's going to be a brand new film to it that was shot in green screen and with virtual backgrounds and all that's new. I think there's if I go to see Harry Potter done in with the Queensland Symphony Orchestra, I pretty much know what I'm getting. It's going to be fantastic. But I know that I'm getting the film I've seen before and the soundtrack I've heard before done live. And for this, I think the difference is the research element. The difference is what's been new and created that people cannot anticipate. There's no way that they would expect it. And to me, that's what's interesting. And for some of it, if they came to two performances, they'd be different. Because of that nature of live production. And improvisation. And much of what we had involved improvisation as well. So it's naturally going to be different from one night to the next. So...
Well, now that's about all the time we have left. Thank you so much for coming down to talk about the FilmHarmonic, Peter. Thank you very much.
My pleasure, and like I said, I'm so grateful that it's got the energy that it has and the support that it has from the film school, from the con, from the wider Griffith community. It's exciting, and it's never ending what we can do with the talent that we've got. So I look forward to future versions.
Yeah. Thank you so much.
Thank you.